Are you doing okay?
My boss, I feel good now. Thank you for saving me.
Before the story unfolds, like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more shocking, emotional stories you won't forget.
A Korean mafia boss only wanted to find out why his black maid didn't show up for work. What he discovered left him furious. Chairman Kong had built an empire on the principle that everyone was replaceable, until the one person he'd never actually seen in 3 years failed to show up for work, and her absence revealed a truth so violent it would force him to choose between the code that made him powerful and the conscience he'd buried beneath it. A Korean mafia boss goes searching for answers and uncovers a truth that changes everything. Before the story unfolds, like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more shocking, emotional stories you won't forget. Turn on notifications. This one gets intense. Chairman Kong noticed the silverware first. It sat on the breakfast table at precisely 6:47 a.m., arranged with the geometric precision of a surgical tray, fork, knife, spoon, all aligned at perfect right angles to the porcelain edge. Except the knife faced the wrong direction. A microscopic deviation. The kind of detail that would escape 99% of humanity. Kong was the 1% who noticed everything. He stared at the errant knife for 3 full seconds, his coffee cooling in bone china that cost more than most Seoul apartments. Something crawled up his spine. Not quite worry, not yet alarm, but that peculiar sensation of order disrupted. In his world, disruption preceded disaster the way thunder preceded lightning. "Where is Emily?" His voice cut through the kitchen's institutional silence. His head of security, a granite-faced man named Cho, appeared in the doorway with the supernatural timing of someone who'd been waiting for the question. "No show, sir. No call. No message." Kang's fingers tightened around his coffee cup, the only visible sign of his displeasure. 3 years. 1,095 days. Amelie Nkosi had arrived before dawn every single morning, moving through his 12,000-square-foot Gangnam fortress like smoke, present but incorporeal, essential but invisible. She knew which newspapers he read first, how he took his coffee when it rained versus when it didn't, that he preferred his bathroom tiles dried in horizontal strokes because vertical ones left streaks that caught morning light wrong. She knew things about him that his own mother didn't know. And he couldn't remember the last time he'd actually looked at her face. "Her file," Kong said. Cho produced a slim folder with the efficiency of a man who'd anticipated the request. Inside, one passport photo of a black woman with cheekbones that could cut glass and eyes that revealed nothing, an address in a neighborhood Kong had never visited, and employment records that read like a testament to inhuman endurance. Start time: 4:45 a.m. End time: variable, usually past midnight. Days off: negotiable, meaning non-existent. "She's probably sick," Cho offered, his tone suggesting he believed nothing of the sort. In their world, people didn't get sick. They got dead, detained, or dangerous. Kong stood, buttoning his suit jacket with movements so precise they bordered on ritualistic. "Get the car." "Sir?" I said, "Get the car." He examined the misaligned knife again, and that crawling sensation intensified. "Something's wrong." Cho's expression flickered, surprise, perhaps, or concern that his boss was developing something dangerously close to human sentiment. "With respect, Chairman, she's just a maid. We can hire another. She's my maid." The correction came out sharper than intended. "And in 3 years, she's never been late. Not once. That's not negligence. That's a message." The drive took 40 minutes, threading through Seoul's morning chaos from the gleaming towers of Gangnam to neighborhoods where wealth went to die quietly. Kong watched the city transform outside tinted windows, designer boutiques giving way to convenience stores, luxury sedans replaced by delivery scooters, the architecture of aspiration crumbling into the reality of survival. Amelie's building squatted between a PC bang and a Chinese restaurant, its concrete facade streaked with rain stains and decades of accumulated resignation. Kong stepped out of his Mercedes, and the street seemed to hold its breath. A mafia chairman didn't visit these neighborhoods. Not in daylight. Not in a hand-tailored suit that cost more than the building's annual maintenance budget. The apartment was on the 4th floor. No elevator. Cho went first, one hand inside his jacket where expensive men kept expensive solutions to complicated problems. But the real violence had already happened. Amelie's door hung crooked in its frame, the lock mechanism shattered, splinters of wood scattered across the landing like casualties. Kong felt his jaw tighten. This wasn't a break-in. This was a statement. Inside, the apartment told a story in the universal language of brutality. Overturned furniture, shattered dishes, a chair lying on its side with one leg snapped clean through, and blood, not pools of it, but strategic splashes, the kind that came from methodical violence rather than passionate chaos. Someone had been hurt here. Deliberately. Carefully. Kong moved through the small space with the focus of a crime scene investigator, which, in a parallel universe where he'd made different choices, he might have been. The apartment was smaller than his walk-in closet, furnished with a kind of desperate practicality that came from stretching everyone until it screamed. But it was clean, or had been before it was destroyed. Everything had its place. Order imposed on poverty with the same discipline she'd brought to his marble fortress. Chairman. Cho's voice pulled him toward the corner, where a bookshelf leaned drunkenly against the wall. Most of the books had been swept to the floor, romance novels with Korean titles, a battered English dictionary, a cookbook that looked like it had survived a war. But one book remained on the shelf. A Bible, its black leather cover worn soft at the edges. Kong pulled it down, and something about the weight felt wrong. Too light. Hollow. He opened it to find the pages carved out with surgical precision, creating a cavity just large enough for a small notebook with a blue cover. His hands, which had signed death warrants without trembling, shook slightly as he extracted it. The first page contained a simple header: hours worked, documentation for personal records. Then came dates, times down to the minute. A catalog of stolen hours, unpaid overtime. A life measured in increments, so small they barely registered as theft. But they accumulated. 3 years of 4-hour sleeps and missed meals, and the slow erosion of self in service to someone else's comfort. Kong felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Guilt, maybe. Or shame's distant cousin. He turned the page, and the documentation shifted. License plates. Names. Meeting times. Park's Thursday briefcase runs. The rotation of nervous politicians using his kitchen entrance. Details so precise they could only come from someone who'd been invisible long enough to see everything. Amelie hadn't just been cleaning his house. She'd been mapping his empire. The entries stopped abruptly on the last page, mid-sentence, ink slightly smeared as if written in haste. And there, at the bottom, in handwriting that managed to be both elegant and desperate, "If anything happens to me, they will deny it." Kong read the line 3 times, and each time it felt like a knife sliding between his ribs with surgical precision. She'd known. She'd known she was disposable, invisible, valuable only insofar as she served a function. She'd known that if she disappeared, no one with power would care, including him, especially him. "Find her," he said quietly. The quietness made it more terrifying than any shout. "And find out who did this." Cho nodded, already pulling out his phone. But Kong was still staring at that final line, and the unfamiliar sensation in his chest had crystallized into something he recognized from a long time ago, back before he'd learned to freeze his emotions into strategic assets. Fury. Not the hot, explosive kind that led to mistakes. The cold, calculated kind that led to consequences. Someone had touched what was his. Someone had violated the sanctity of his household, the invisible rules that kept his world ordered and predictable. Worse, they'd hurt someone who'd spent 3 years making his life function with the smooth invisibility of a perfectly oiled machine. And they'd assumed he wouldn't care. That assumption, Kong thought as he carefully tucked the notebook into his jacket, was going to cost them everything. The invisible archive the notebook felt like a live grenade in Kang's jacket pocket during the drive back to Gangnam. He sat in the back of the Mercedes, jaw clenched, mind racing through possibilities with the cold efficiency of a man who'd built an empire on calculated brutality. Cho made calls in rapid-fire Korean, activating networks that stretched across Seoul like neural pathways, informants, contacts, people who owed favors or feared consequences. Kong barely heard him. He was too busy reading between the lines of Amelie's careful documentation, seeing his own organization through the eyes of someone who'd been furniture for 3 years. Back at the house, he spread the notebook across his desk like evidence at a trial. His study, all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate, suddenly felt like a confessional. The pages told two stories simultaneously. On the surface, meticulous records of a woman tracking her own exploitation, documenting every stolen hour, every missed break, every time dignity was sacrificed to convenience. But underneath, something else emerged. A map. An accidental intelligence operation conducted by someone who'd never intended to spy but couldn't help being observant. Because when you're invisible, you see everything. When people forget you're in the room, they stop performing. They become themselves. Park's Thursday briefcase deliveries corresponded with cash flow spikes in their money laundering operations. The nervous politicians using the kitchen entrance matched up with pending legislation that would benefit Kang's legitimate business fronts. Even the rotation of security personnel revealed patterns he hadn't consciously noticed, gaps in coverage, potential vulnerabilities. Amelie had accidentally documented what a hostile intelligence agency would have paid millions to obtain. And she'd done it in self-defense, creating proof of her own existence in a world designed to erase her. Kong poured himself whiskey from a crystal decanter, then stopped mid-pour. Amelie had been the one to clean this decanter every morning, removing fingerprints and water spots with the same quiet precision she brought to everything. For 3 years, she'd touched every surface in his life, and he'd never once wondered about the person doing the touching. The desk phone buzzed. Cho's voice came through, stripped of its usual professional veneer. "We found something. The clinic in Itaewon. A woman matching her description was brought in 2 nights ago. Severe bruising, possible fractured ribs. Paid cash, no insurance, gave a fake name. Is she still there? Discharged herself this morning against medical advice." But Chairman Cho paused, and pauses from Cho meant complications. The clinic receptionist recognized the men who brought her in. Said they looked like our guys. The whiskey glass cracked in Kang's grip. Not shattered. His control was too absolute for that. But fine fractures spiderwebbed across the crystal. Our guys. Internal violence. Someone in his organization had beaten his maid and been stupid enough to use recognizable faces. Security footage from the clinic, Kong said, his voice carrying the temperature of liquid nitrogen. And pull records from every camera within 3 blocks of her apartment. I want faces, license plates, timestamps. Everything. Already on it. But Chairman, there's something else. Another pause. Lee Min-ho hasn't reported for duty in 2 days. And his usual crew, Young, Park Sung, Kim Tae-won, they're all conveniently unreachable. Min-ho, the junior enforcer who thought borrowed power made him untouchable. Handsome, entitled, dangerous in the way that mediocre men become when given weapons and authority. Kong had been monitoring him peripherally, noting the gradual slide from cocky to reckless, but hadn't intervened. Everyone had to learn limits through consequence. Apparently, Min-ho had learned his through Amelie. "Find them," Kong said. "All 4. I want them in front of me before sunset." He hung up and returned to the notebook, flipping to the entries from 2 nights ago. There, in Amelie's precise handwriting, a departure from the usual documentation, saw Min-ho near Mrs. Kim's building.
Drunk.
Following someone. Then nothing. The entries just stopped. Kang's mind reconstructed the scene with the clarity of someone who'd orchestrated enough violence to recognize its patterns. Min-ho, drunk on soju and impunity, doing something that required intervention. Amelie intervening. Because that's what people with spines did, they stood up when standing up cost them everything. And then the retaliation. Swift, brutal, designed to remind her of her place in the hierarchy. A hierarchy Kong had built. A hierarchy that treated people like Amelie as acceptable casualties in the machinery of power. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against marble floors that Amelie had polished to mirror brightness every morning while he slept. His reflection stared back at him from the window, a man in a $10,000 suit, ruler of an empire built on fear and violence, suddenly forced to confront what that empire looked like from the perspective of someone cleaning its floors. It looked, he realized with a clarity that felt like a slap, monstrous. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. She's at Mrs. Kim's apartment, Building 7, Unit 403. She won't go to a hospital. She's scared. No signature. Someone in the neighborhood network, protecting their own. Kong memorized the address and deleted the message. Cho, he called out, already moving toward the door. We're going back. The confrontation. Mrs. Kim's apartment building looked even more depressing in afternoon light than it had at dawn. The concrete seemed to absorb sunshine and convert it into despair, and the stairwell smelled like kimchi, mildew, and accumulated broken dreams. Kong climbed to the fourth floor with Cho trailing behind, both of them absurdly overdressed for the setting, designer suits in a place where people bought clothes by weight. Unit 403 had a door decorated with faded flower stickers and a welcome mat that had given up welcoming years ago. Kong knocked, not the aggressive pounding of authority, but the careful tap of someone who understood they were entering someone else's sanctuary without invitation. The door cracked open to reveal a woman in her 50s, eyes sharp with protective suspicion. Mrs. Kim, presumably. She looked at Kang's suit, then his face, and her expression shifted through several calculations before settling on wary courtesy. We're closed, she said in Korean, even though they obviously weren't a business. I'm looking for Ameline Kosi, Kong replied, keeping his voice neutral. I'm her employer. Chairman Kong. Mrs. Kim's face went pale. Her grip on the door tightened, knuckles whitening, and for a moment Kong thought she might slam it in his face. He wouldn't have blamed her. Men like him didn't visit neighborhoods like this with good intentions. She doesn't want to see you, Mrs. Kim said finally. I understand, but I need to see her. You need? Mrs. Kim's fear was giving way to something more dangerous, maternal fury. Your people already saw her. Look what they did. The accusation hung in the narrow hallway like smoke. Your people. His people. The empire he'd built was eating itself, and the casualties were invisible until they weren't. That's why I'm here, Kong said quietly. To fix it. Mrs. Kim studied him for a long moment, searching for something in his face. Sincerity, maybe, or at least the capacity for it. Whatever she found made her step back, opening the door wider. She's resting. And if you upset her, I don't care who you are. I'll call every reporter in Seoul. An empty threat from someone powerless, but Kong respected it anyway. He nodded and entered the small apartment, Cho remaining outside as silent security. The living room was cramped but clean, decorated with family photos and that particular sadness that came from making do with less while watching others waste more. Amelie sat on a worn sofa near the window, her body angled like someone who'd learned that certain positions hurt less than others. She wore an oversized sweater that couldn't quite hide the way she held herself, careful, protective, every movement calculated to minimize pain. Her face, which he'd seen in exactly one passport photo, looked simultaneously younger and older than he'd imagined. Younger in its smooth skin and high cheekbones. Older in its eyes. She looked up when he entered, and something flickered across her face. Not fear. Worse. Resignation. The look of someone who'd expected this conversation and had already decided it would change nothing. Amelie, Kong said, then realized he'd never actually spoken her name aloud before. 3 years of service, and her name had existed only in employment files. You want me to sign something? She cut him off, voice rough but steady. Non-disclosure? Release of liability? I'll sign. Just leave Mrs. Kim out of it. The assumption landed like a physical blow. She thought he'd come to silence her, to tie up loose ends, to ensure his empire's violence stayed invisible. And why wouldn't she think that? It's exactly what men like him did. I want to know what happened, Kong said, lowering himself onto a chair across from her without waiting for permission. The truth. All of it. Emily laughed, a short, bitter sound. The truth? The truth is your junior enforcer decided a 12-year-old girl was fair game. I stopped him. He didn't like being stopped by the help. So he and his friends reminded me of my place. She gestured at her bruised ribs. That's the truth. Simple.
Boring.
The kind of story that happens every day to people you don't see. I see you now, Kong said. Congratulations. You won a medal for basic human decency? The sarcasm was unexpected. Justified, but unexpected. Kong had faced down rival gangs, corrupt politicians, and legitimate businessmen with murder in their eyes, but this battered woman on a second-hand sofa made him feel more uncomfortable than all of them combined. I found your notebook, he said, pulling it from his jacket. In the Bible. Emily's eyes went wide, then hardened. So, you came to kill me properly this time? Make sure there's no evidence. I came to apologize. The words hung in the room like something alien and impossible. Mrs. Kim, hovering in the kitchen doorway, actually gasped. Cho would have had a heart attack if he'd heard. Chairman Kong didn't apologize. Apologies implied fallibility, and his entire empire was built on the illusion of infallibility. Emily stared at him like he'd started speaking ancient Sumerian. You're apologizing. You worked in my house for 3 years. Under my protection. And someone violated that.
Hurt you.
Because they thought you didn't matter. Kong met her eyes directly. They were wrong. And so was I. The revelation. Emily's laugh came out sharp and jagged, like broken glass scraping concrete. Your protection? Chairman, I was under your roof, not your protection. There's a difference. Kong absorbed the hit without flinching.
She was right.
Protection implied active care, vigilance, the willingness to shield. What he'd offered was merely proximity to power, and as she'd learned brutally, proximity wasn't the same as safety. Tell me exactly what happened, he said. Every detail.
Why?
So you can decide if I'm worth the trouble of revenge? So you can measure whether my broken ribs justify disrupting your organization. Emily shifted on the sofa, wincing despite her best efforts to hide it. I'm not interested in being the moral centerpiece of your redemption arc. Mrs. Kim moved from the kitchen doorway, carrying tea that nobody wanted but Korean hospitality demanded. She set the cups down with deliberate care, her eyes moving between Emily and Kong like a referee at a boxing match. Ji-woo is my daughter, Mrs. Kim said quietly, settling the question of sides. 12 years old. She takes piano lessons on Tuesday nights. Emily heard her crying in the stairwell. The story emerged in fragments, traded between the two women like runners passing a baton. Minho in the stairwell, drunk and entitled, cornering a child. Emily intervening without calculation, moving on pure instinct, the kind of instinct that separated decent people from everyone else. The confrontation. The crack of Minho's kneecap under her boot. You broke his leg? Kong asked, and something almost like respect flickered across his face. I defended a child, Emily corrected. If that costs me everything, then everything wasn't worth much to begin with. Kong absorbed this, filing it away in the expanding folder of things he'd misjudged about the woman who'd spent 3 years making his life function smoothly. He'd assumed invisibility meant weakness. He'd been catastrophically wrong. Minho came back with 3 others, Emily continued, her voice flattening into the tone people used when recounting trauma, clinical, distant, like describing events that happened to someone else. They were professional about it. Methodical. They knew where to hit to avoid visible damage. They kept saying I'd forgotten my place, that Chairman Kang's house didn't protect people who bit the hand that fed them. Each word landed like a stone in Kang's stomach. His name, weaponized. His authority, used to justify brutality against someone who'd done nothing but show courage. The sickness he felt wasn't guilt exactly. Guilt implied surprise at his own capacity for harm. This was something darker. Recognition. They used my name, he said. They used your entire empire. Emily shot back. The hierarchy, the fear, the understanding that people like me exist to be used and discarded. They didn't invent that system, Chairman. They just enforced it. Mrs. Kim placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that made Kong feel like an intruder in his own crisis, which he supposed he was. This wasn't his tragedy. He was just the architect of the system that enabled it. "Where's Jiwoo now?" he asked. "Safe," Mrs. Kim said immediately, defensively. "With my sister in Busan. Until this is over." Until what was over? Kong wondered. The immediate danger? The general threat of existing in proximity to powerful men? The entire corrupt system that ground people like Emily and Jiwoo into dust while men like him drank expensive whiskey and never noticed? He pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and transferred an amount that made Mrs. Kim's teacup rattle when she saw the notification on her phone. Enough to keep Jiwoo in Busan for a year, to pay for piano lessons and therapy, and whatever else a child needed after being hunted in her own stairwell. "Blood money," Emily said flatly. "Restitution," Kong corrected. "And it's not enough. It won't ever be enough. But it's a start." He stood, buttoning his jacket with those precise movements that betrayed nothing of the chaos in his mind. "Min-ho and his crew. They're being found as we speak. What happens to them is your decision." Emily looked up sharply. "My decision? You're the injured party. Justice should be yours to define." Justice. Emily tested the word like it was foreign. "In your world, justice means what? Breaking their legs? Worse? I defend a child and get beaten. You offer me revenge and call it justice. It's still just violence wearing a different mask." Kong had no answer to that. She was right again. His world only knew one language: force and the threat of force. He'd built an empire on that single vocabulary, and now he was discovering how insufficient it was for actual human problems. "Then what do you want?" he asked. Emily met his eyes, and he saw something in her gaze that made him deeply uncomfortable. Not hatred, not even anger. Something more dangerous than either: clarity. "I want to go back to work," she said. "But on my terms. Real terms. The kind that treat me like a human being instead of a piece of furniture that occasionally needs maintenance." Kong nodded slowly. "Done. I'm not finished. The terms." Emily's eyes held steady on Kong, and he recognized the look. It was the same expression he wore when negotiating with people who assumed they had leverage. The difference was that she actually did. "I want a contract," she said, each word deliberate. "A real one. Written in Korean and English. Specified hours, overtime pay, weekends off. Sick leave. The revolutionary concept of being treated like every other employee in South Korea who isn't invisible." Mrs. Kim's hand tightened on Emily's shoulder, pride and fear mixing in her expression. Demanding things from men like Chairman Kong was how people disappeared. But Emily had already been beaten, already survived the worst his empire could casually inflict. What was left to fear? "Agreed," Kong said simply. "I'm still not finished." Emily shifted on the sofa, paying for the movement with a barely suppressed wince. "Every other foreign worker in your employment, the kitchen staff, the drivers, the security team, they get the same contract. Same protections. And someone from outside your organization audits compliance monthly." Kang's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She wasn't just negotiating for herself. She was demanding systematic change, turning one woman's trauma into institutional reform. It was either incredibly brave or suicidally stupid, and he hadn't decided which. "You're asking me to restructure my entire household operation," he said. "I'm asking you to stop exploiting people just because you can. There's a difference." The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Mrs. Kim held her breath. Somewhere outside, Seoul continued its indifferent chaos. Cars honking, people rushing, the world spinning on an axis that didn't care about moral reckonings in cramped apartments. Kong thought about his empire. The careful architecture of fear and loyalty and calculated violence that kept everything running smoothly. Introducing accountability, transparency, actual human dignity into that system would create cracks, vulnerabilities. His lieutenants would see it as weakness. Rivals would probe for advantages. The whole delicate ecosystem might collapse. Or it might evolve into something that didn't require beating innocent women to maintain itself. I'll have the contracts drawn up by tomorrow, he said finally. My lawyer will deliver them here for your review before you sign anything. Emily's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, that he'd agreed so readily. She'd been prepared for negotiation, resistance, the kind of grinding compromise that left everyone unsatisfied. But Kong had learned long ago that the best way to disarm an opponent was to give them exactly what they asked for, then exceed it. And Min-ho? She asked quietly. The question hung in the room like smoke. This was the real test Kong knew. Justice versus revenge. Accountability versus violence. The choice between perpetuating his empire's brutal logic and finding some third path that didn't exist yet. What do you want? He asked again. Emily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the pattern on Mrs. Kim's worn sofa. I want him to understand what he did. Not just to me, to Ji-woo. To every person he's ever hurt because he thought borrowed power made him untouchable. I want him to feel what it's like to be powerless. That can be arranged, Kong said, his mind already calculating methods. Strip Min-ho of position, protection, the armor of organizational affiliation. Let him experience the world from the bottom looking up. It was cruel in its own way, but far less violent than what Min-ho deserved. But I don't want him dead, Emily added, and Kang's calculation stuttered. I don't want to become like you, solving problems with violence. If he dies, I'm just another link in the same chain. The words landed like a slap. Another link in the same chain. She saw clearly what he spent enormous energy obscuring, that his empire was a machine that converted human beings into casualties, and everyone who participated became complicit. Then he lives, Kong said. But he loses everything else. Position, respect, protection. He'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, knowing that the only reason he's breathing is because you showed him more mercy than he showed you. And the others? His crew. Same fate. Exile from the organization. Their names circulated to every syndicate in Seoul as unreliable, violent, stupid. In this world, that's a death sentence without the actual death. Emily nodded slowly, satisfying herself that justice could exist without blood. Mrs. Kim released a breath she'd been holding since Kong walked through the door. When do I start? Emily asked. Whenever you're healed. A week, 2 weeks, a month. Your position is secure. Under the new terms. Under the new terms, Kong confirmed. He stood, and this time Emily didn't flinch. Progress, he supposed, measured in micrometers. He moved toward the door, then paused. The notebook. The documentation. You were protecting yourself. I was proving I existed, Emily corrected. In a world designed to erase me, I wanted evidence that I'd been here. That I mattered. Even if only to myself. Kong nodded, understanding blooming in uncomfortable ways. He'd built an empire. She'd built a record. Both acts of defiance against erasure, just aimed at different kinds of oblivion. You mattered, he said quietly. I just wasn't paying attention. The reckoning. Min-ho was found in a shipping warehouse near Incheon port, hiding behind stacked containers like a rat in a maze. When Cho's team dragged him into the light, he still had the audacity to look indignant, as if being hunted was somehow beneath his dignity, as if consequences were things that happened to other people. They brought him to one of Kang's secondary properties, an unmarked building in an industrial district where the neighbors had learned decades ago that hearing nothing was a survival skill. The room was concrete and fluorescent lights, designed for conversations that left no permanent marks but permanent impressions. Kong arrived an hour after Min-ho, letting fear do the preliminary work. Psychological warfare was always more effective than physical. By the time he walked through the door, Min-ho had sweated through his designer shirt and was shaking, though whether from withdrawal, terror, or the devastating realization that he'd miscalculated everything, Kong couldn't say. Chairman, Min-ho started, his voice cracking. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain. Explain what? Kang's voice was conversational, almost pleasant, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Explain why you cornered a 12-year-old child in a stairwell? Explain why you and your crew beat my employee so badly she could barely crawl for help? Please. I'm fascinated to hear the explanation. Minho's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His eyes darted around the room, searching for exits, allies, anything that might save him from this moment. He found nothing. His crew, Young, Park Sung, and Kim Tae-won, knelt against the opposite wall, heads down, already broken. They'd understood faster than Minho what was happening. This wasn't negotiation. This was judgment. She attacked me. Minho finally managed. She broke my leg. I was defending myself. Kong moved closer, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. Defending yourself. From a woman who weighs maybe 50 kilograms. Who works 20-hour days cleaning my house. Who you outnumbered 4-1 when you kicked down her door. She didn't understand her place. The slap came so fast Minho didn't see it coming. Not hard enough to do damage, just enough to shock, to interrupt, to remind him that he had no control here. Kong had learned long ago that strategic violence was about precision, not force. Her place, Kong repeated softly, was under my protection. You violated that. You used my name to justify brutalizing someone who couldn't fight back. You made me complicit in your cowardice. Minho's face crumpled, tears mixing with snot in a display that would have been pathetic if it weren't so calculated. Kong had seen this performance before. Powerful men discovering that tears were just another weapon when actual power evaporated. It never worked. Crocodiles didn't mourn their prey convincingly. Please, Chairman. I made a mistake. I'll apologize. I'll pay her whatever she wants. She doesn't want her money. Kong cut him off. She wants you to understand what you did. To feel what it's like to be powerless. And I'm going to give her that. He gestured to Cho, who stepped forward with a folder. Inside were documents, termination papers, blacklist notifications, evidence packages ready for distribution across Seoul's underworld network. Minho's career, reputation, and future reduced to paperwork. You're done, Kong said simply. Effective immediately, you're expelled from the organization. Your name will be circulated to every syndicate, every crew, every independent operator in South Korea. The message will be clear. You're violent, unreliable, and stupid. No one will hire you. No one will protect you. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when someone decides you're worth the effort of revenge. Minho's face went pale. In their world, exile was worse than execution. Death was final, clean, ended suffering. Exile was prolonged terror, the constant awareness that you were prey in an ecosystem of predators. You can't. The rules, I have rights. Rights? Kang's laugh was cold. You believe in rights now? When it benefits you. Where were Amelie's rights when you kicked down her door? Where were Jiwoo's rights when you cornered her in a stairwell? He leaned down until they were eye level. You built your entire personality on the assumption that power made you untouchable. Congratulations. You're about to learn what life looks like from the other side. He turned to the three men kneeling against the wall. Same fate. All of you. You followed orders without thinking, participated in assault without question, assumed your position protected you from consequences. It doesn't. Park Sung, the oldest of the group, looked up with desperate eyes. Chairman, please. We have families. So does Amelie. So does Mrs. Kim. So does every person in this city trying to survive while people like you exercise cruelty for entertainment. Kang's voice hardened. Your families will be fine. We'll ensure they're not punished for your failures.
But you?
You're finished. The beauty of it, Kong thought as he watched four men realize their lives were over, was that Amelie had been right. This wasn't murder. It wasn't even violence, technically. It was justice achieved through the same networks and systems they'd exploited, turned against them with surgical precision. They'd live. They'd just live in fear, powerlessness, and constant awareness of their own vulnerability. Exactly what they'd inflicted on others. Take them out, Kong ordered. Process the paperwork. Start the distributions. I want every crew in Seoul to know by morning what happens when you touch someone under my protection. As Cho's team hauled the men out, Minho still crying, the others silent in their devastation. Kong felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Not the usual cold triumph of defeating enemies. Something closer to emptiness. Because punishing four men didn't fix the system that created them. It didn't address the fundamental rot at the heart of his empire, the machinery that ground people like Amelie into invisibility while elevating mediocre men into positions where they could hurt others without consequence. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. The contracts I mentioned. Expedite them. I want them ready for signature by tomorrow morning. And draft a company-wide policy on worker protection, harassment, accountability. Get input from an outside labor rights organization. I don't care if it's unusual. Do it. There was a pause on the other end, surprise, confusion, possibly concern about his mental state. But the lawyer was smart enough to simply say, "Yes, Chairman." Kong hung up and stared at the empty room, fluorescent lights humming their indifferent song. For men punished. One woman partially avenged. An empire beginning to acknowledge its own brutality. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. And in a world built on violence, choosing accountability over revenge felt almost revolutionary. The Reformation. 3 weeks later, Amelie returned to Chairman Kang's Gangnam fortress, and everything looked different despite nothing having physically changed. The marble still gleamed with obscene wealth. The security cameras still tracked movement with paranoid precision. The mahogany furniture still cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But the house felt different. Or maybe she felt different. Hard to tell which. She arrived at 8 a.m., not 4:47 a.m., carrying a leather portfolio that contained her signed contract. 8-hour workdays. Weekends off. Overtime pay at time and a half. Sick leave. Health insurance. Revolutionary concepts translated into binding legal language by lawyers who'd probably never imagined drafting such documents for a Mafia boss's household staff. Cho met her at the entrance, his granite face attempting something that might have been a smile if you squinted and believed in miracles. Ms. Nkosi. Welcome back. Ms. Nkosi. Not the maid, or just Amelie barked like a command. The formality felt strange, like wearing shoes that didn't quite fit yet but might, eventually, with breaking in. The chairman is in his study. Cho continued. He'd like to see you when you're settled. Settled. As if she had an office, a space, a place in this marble fortress that wasn't defined entirely by cleaning products and invisible labor. Amelie followed Cho through hallways she'd scrubbed 1,000 times, seeing them now from a slightly different angle. No longer furniture navigating around obstacles. Something closer to a person walking through a workplace. Kang's study door was open, a small thing, but significant. 3 years of closed doors, of knocking and waiting for permission to enter spaces she cleaned. Now open. An invitation rather than a barrier. He stood when she entered. That was new too. Chairman Kong, who bent for no one, standing for his maid. Former maid? Current employee? The terminology hadn't caught up with the reality yet. Amelie. He gestured to a chair across from his desk.
Please, sit.
She did, slowly, ribs still tender but healing. The chair was leather and probably cost more than her entire year's salary. It felt absurd to be sitting in it instead of dusting it. How are you feeling? Kong asked. Like I got beaten and survived, she replied honestly. But healing. The clinic you arranged helped. After the confrontation at Mrs. Kim's apartment, Kong had sent a private doctor. Discreet, competent, expensive. No questions asked. No paperwork that might complicate her immigration status. Just professional medical care delivered to people who usually couldn't access it. I wanted to brief you on changes, Kong said, sliding a folder across the desk. Your contract was the template. I've extended similar terms to every household employee. Kitchen staff, drivers, security team. Outside auditor begins monthly reviews next week. Amelie opened the folder, scanning documents that represented a small revolution in labor practices. It wouldn't win Kong any humanitarian awards. He was still a crime boss running an empire built on fear and violence, but it was something. A crack in the permafrost. And Minho, she asked.
Gone.
He and his crew were expelled. Their names circulated across Seoul's networks with appropriate warnings. They're alive, as you requested, but their careers are over. They'll spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Emily nodded slowly. She'd spent 3 weeks wrestling with whether she'd made the right choice. Mercy versus justice, compassion versus revenge. The answer still eluded her. Maybe there wasn't an answer. Maybe moral clarity was a luxury people in impossible situations couldn't afford. There's something else, Kong continued. I'm establishing a fund. For workers like you, foreign domestic employees, people in vulnerable positions, legal assistance, emergency housing, medical care. It'll be administered by an independent organization, not connected to my businesses. I want your input on structure. My input. Emily tested the words. You're asking the furniture for decorating advice? A ghost of a smile crossed Kang's face. You were never furniture. I was just too blind to see you. The admission hung between them. Not quite an apology, because Kong had already apologized, but an acknowledgement of something deeper. Systemic blindness. The active effort required to not see people, to maintain hierarchies that depended on invisibility. Why are you doing this? Emily asked. Really? The contracts, the fund, the reforms. Is it guilt? Reputation management? Some kind of redemption arc? Kong was quiet for a moment, his fingers steepled in that way powerful men did when pretending to contemplate questions they'd already answered. You wrote something in your notebook. If anything happens to me, they will deny it. That line has haunted me for 3 weeks. Good, Emily said without sympathy. You documented your existence because you assumed you were disposable. That if you disappeared, no one with power would care. And you were right. I wouldn't have cared. I didn't care for 3 years about anything beyond whether my shirts were ironed correctly. He met her eyes. I'm doing this because you shouldn't have been right. Because an empire that requires people to be invisible isn't an empire worth maintaining. Emily absorbed this, suspicious of sincerity from men who'd built careers on manipulation. But something in Kang's face suggested he believed what he was saying. Whether belief translated to lasting change remained to be seen. I'll help with the fund, she said finally. On one condition. Name it. Jiwoo gets a full scholarship for her education. Piano lessons, university, whatever she needs. And Mrs. Kim gets a stipend, so she doesn't have to work herself to death like I did. Done. Kong didn't hesitate. Anything else? Emily thought about it, about 3 years of invisible labor, about violence survived, about the absurd situation of sitting in a crime boss's study negotiating humanitarian reforms, about how change happened in increments through small confrontations that accumulated into something larger. Yeah, she said. I want Thursdays off. Non-negotiable. Kong nodded. Thursdays off. They sat in silence for a moment, two people from completely different worlds who'd collided and somehow emerged changed. Not redeemed. Redemption was too clean, too final. But altered. Aware. Accountable in ways that felt uncomfortable but necessary. One more thing, Emily said, standing. Stop calling me brave. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. I just didn't have the luxury of letting fear stop me. Kong stood as well. Then what should I call you? Try colleague, Emily suggested. Let's start there and see how it fits. She left the study, walking through marble hallways with her head up. No longer smoke or furniture or invisible labor. Just a woman who'd survived, documented her existence into permanence, and forced an empire to acknowledge her humanity. Outside, Seoul hummed with its usual chaos. Somewhere in the city, Minho was learning what powerlessness felt like. Mrs. Kim was breathing easier knowing her daughter was safe. Jiwoo was playing piano, her future secured by someone else's courage. And in a Gangnam fortress, a crime boss sat alone in his study, staring at a notebook filled with careful handwriting, finally understanding what his empire looked like from the floor. Change didn't happen in revolutions. It happened in moments like this, small, uncomfortable, insufficient, but real. Furniture had been watching all along. Furniture remembered everything. And now, finally, furniture had a voice.
The end.